There's a scene in The Road where the main character is remembering coming across the remains of a library after the world had ended. The library is desecrated and flooded, destroyed. Books are all over the place. Shelves are tipped over. Cormac McCarthy describes it by saying, quote, "Years later, he'd stood in the charred ruins of a library where blackened books lay in pools of water, shelves tipped over. Some rage at the lies arranged in their thousands, row on row. He picked up one of the books and thumbed through the heavily bloated pages. He'd not have thought the value of the smallest thing predicated on a world to come. It surprised him that the space which these things occupied was itself an expectation. He let the book fall and took a last look around and made his way out into the cold gray light." End quote. So I think you have to imagine this library in its golden age, right? Filled with books and filled with knowledge, people interacting, exchanging cultural knowledge and rituals and stories and history, and books just filled with information about all of the things that matter in that world. But as the man is pointing out in that passage where he's reminiscing, all of that stuff only matters if there's a tomorrow for those things to matter in. And as the man is thinking about this type of thing, he's surprised that he realizes that even the smallest thing is meaningful or important only if we assume that tomorrow is going to come and that thing's going to continue being there tomorrow. Obviously, the man is living in this post-apocalyptic horror show that we've been reading about in The Road. And so this sense of existential threat and existential dread is prevalent throughout the book. There's a moment earlier in the story where the man and the boy are discussing the need to post a lookout at night while one of them sleeps so that the bad guys don't come and ambush them when they're unaware. And they discuss the fact that in order to post a lookout or in order to be ready for the worst case scenario, you have to be a little bit scared. So they're discussing this idea of posting a lookout and they're discussing being ready for the worst case scenario. And you can't help but wonder if maybe this passage is a little bit on the nose because it might also be referring to a sort of laissez-faire attitude toward existential threat that Cormac McCarthy may be seeing in the real world. The conversation starts with the boy asking his dad, quote, "If you're on the lookout all the time, does that mean that you're scared all the time?" "Well, I suppose you have to be scared enough to be on the lookout in the first place, to be cautious, watchful. But the rest of the time you're not scared?" "The rest of the time. Yeah." "I don't know. Maybe you should always be on the lookout. If trouble comes when you least expect it, then maybe the thing to do is to always expect it." End quote. Anytime you have a story about a dystopia or a post-apocalyptic world, you're going to have this existential threat as a theme. But I like the way that McCarthy plays with this idea, connecting it to the characters' memories and using the interactions between the characters to hold up a mirror towards our own society in the real world. At any rate, we last left the story with the boy and the man sitting back to back on the road, preparing to re-engage their journey south to the coast. And in the next phase of their journey, they come across an old man. They share some food with him, they share their fire with him, and they listen to his story. The old guy is a grizzled veteran of the road, and I guess this is a bit of a common trope, maybe in stories where the characters come across a older version of themselves, or maybe just an older person who's been through more than them and can share their experience. But it's definitely a trope in the works of Cormac McCarthy. A lot of his books have this appearance of some sort of old man who often starts waxing philosophically about different aspects of life or something that the characters are worried about. And sure enough, the man starts talking about his perspective on the world, and in particular, his views on religion and God. remember earlier that we said that the man's wife ended up killing herself because she believed that death was already here and they were just living in death. Well, the old guy here takes it a step further. He says, there's really nothing left. There's not even any gods left, and things will be better when everybody's gone. He says, quote, when we're all gone at last, then there will be nobody here but death, and his days will be numbered too. He'll be out on the road there with nothing to do and nobody to do it to. He'll say, where did everybody go? And that's how it will be. What's wrong with that? End quote. So in this crazy world, even death's days are numbered, and he won't even have anyone to torment. He'll get bored, and he'll have nothing to do, and he'll go away too. Kind of some scary imagery there, and the man has some lines that are delivered with some force. He says that there is no God, and we are his prophets. He says, where men can't live, gods fare no better. So, of course, you're left to wonder about the supernatural and about the ideas of gods being a construct of man, existing independently of man, not existing at all, or some combination of those things. I do think that there are a fair amount of references to religion and God in this book, and you don't have to stretch too much to interpret this in a Christian sort of worldview. The idea of a father and a son, and maybe the idea that implied perhaps is that the son is going to be the one to maintain goodness in the world and go on that burdensome journey to potentially save everybody else, and the idea of just saving goodness and hope in the world. He might be the last one to have it. Another idea looking through this interpretation of the book is the idea of the son conquering death, making it through the road to the other side. And I think sometimes this interpretation of the book can be pretty direct. The old man marvels at the boy when he sees him. He says that he never thought to see a child again, and he wonders, or at least implies pretty openly, that the boy might be some sort of angel or a god. Although again, he hopes not, because, as he said earlier, where men can't live, gods fare no better. And the old man is skeptical, or at least seems skeptical, of the man and the boy's project on the road. The old man asks the father straight up why the son wanted to come and help him, why he wanted to stay and share some food and fire with the man as opposed to just walking past him like almost every other traveler would probably do. I think this conversation is interesting. It starts off by the old man saying, quote, why did he do it? He looked over at the boy and he looked at the old man. You wouldn't understand, he said. I'm not sure I do. Maybe he believes in God. I don't know what he believes in. He'll get over it. No, he won't. End quote. So what does the boy believe in, and what is it that seems to be nurturing this goodness in him, this sense of hope and this sense of compassion that is completely eradicated elsewhere in the world? Maybe it's God, but maybe it's also just goodness and the boy's desire to carry the fire, like he's been mentioning a few times throughout the book. And the carrying of that fire gets harder and harder as the book goes on. The foreshadowing for the death of the father continues getting more heavy as the book goes on. And towards the end of the book, they come across what I would consider rock bottom here. There's a group of 4 travelers, 3 men, 1 woman, and she's pregnant. Later on, they come across a campfire with a charred baby on a stick. Sickening and even difficult to talk about as I go here, but it's worth noting, I think, because this does become a hugely important moment for the boy who has to witness this just pure evil at the end of the world. And I think to understand it, it's worth noting that earlier in the story, they came across victims of a firestorm on the road. And the victims were literally killed in the road, kind of interred there as they continued their journey. And so the boy asked the dad, why didn't the victims of the firestorm leave the road and maybe seek shelter? So I think the boy starts to understand that maybe there is something underneath that was continuing to drive those people forward. Some sort of strength of will, some sort of goodness, some sort of hope, the idea of carrying the fire on. Finally, the man and the boy reach the beach, and of course the beach is just gray and smoggy and cold and dead. The boy goes swimming anyway. They find a boat on the beach. The name of the boat is the Bird of Hope. They find some materials and supplies in there. They get a flare gun, a first aid kit. And it's somewhere around this time that as the boy gets sick and recovers, the father is wearing down completely and someone steals their cart. They track him down and the man grabs the cart back and somewhat cruelly takes the clothes off the guy's back and threatens to kill him. The boy talks him out of it, but the man leaves him there in the road completely naked. The justification for the man is that that's what that guy would have done to them. He stole their cart and he left them for dead, and now he's going to do an eye for an eye and leave the thief there, naked, alone, and left for dead. But the problem, of course, is that we see the result of where that mindset has left humanity throughout this book, and the boy, who still has some compassion left in him, makes the dad go back and leave the clothes for the thief. The man tells the boy that he wasn't actually going to kill the thief, but didn't feel that way in the moment, at least for me when I was reading it. And then the boy points out that we did kill him just by leaving him there. Ultimately, the man gets hit with a makeshift arrow from some random assailant in one of the towns that they pass through along the coast. This is the beginning of the end. The man dies, but not before having a final conversation with the boy where he tells him that the only light left is inside the boy, and he has to carry the fire. Goodness will find you. It always has, and it will again. The boy stays with the corpse of his dad for days, and in the final moments of the book, a family happens to be walking by, and in a emotional and poignant exchange, it turns out that they are carrying the fire as well, and the boy is going to go with them. So after all of that, maybe the light that the boy is carrying with him has prevailed, and maybe there is some goodness, or at least some sliver of hope, that is going to continue to be carried on. There is a final paragraph at the end of the book that I want to discuss in a little bit here, but I think before that it's worth pausing and at the conclusion of the book asking, what is this book really about? And I think sometimes the simplest explanations are sometimes easy to come by, but they're actually incredibly deep. And I think you really could look at The Road as a tale of good and evil. I've read a lot of Cormac McCarthy's books, and the idea of evil is present in all of them, sometimes in different ways and different forms. But one of the things that is common throughout all his books is that there's usually always this looming sense of evil that is ever present, and oftentimes the so-called villains or the people that are the antagonists of the story, and sometimes even the horrifying world of the story, like maybe the case in The Road, sometimes those characters are just representations of a real evil. The evil that we can comprehend as mere humans could actually just be a shade, a representation of evil that we are able to understand and it may not actually comb the true depths of what that is. I'm going to read a passage here that I think McCarthy uses to get at this idea in this book here. And I actually don't know if this is a dream that the man was having, or if this is a memory of something that happened in his childhood, or if this is just some random aside from Cormac McCarthy here in the middle of the book. Anyway, McCarthy says, quote, "Standing at the edge of a winter field among rough men, the boy's age, a little older, watching while they opened up the rocky hillside ground with pick and mattock and brought to light a great bolus of serpents, perhaps 100 in number, collected there for a common warmth, the dull tubes of them beginning to move sluggishly in the cold hard light, like the bowels of some great beast exposed to the day. The men poured gasoline on them and burned them alive, having no remedy for evil, but only for the image of it as they conceived it to be. The burning snakes twisted horribly, and some crawled burning across the floor of the grotto to illuminate its darker recesses. As they were mute, there were no screams of pain, and the men watched them burn and writhe and blacken in just such silence themselves, and they disbanded in silence in the winter dusk, each with his own thoughts, to go home to their suppers." End quote. So you have this imagery of humanity coming face to face with evil. And again, you have this religious imagery with the snakes. And the men are burning these snakes and killing them, and the light from that destruction is giving them this little glimpse into the abyss from where the snakes came from. And then that little glimpse goes away, and the men all go home feeling proud of themselves to their suppers, as if no big deal, right? It's almost like this is some sort of ritual that makes them feel good so that they can go home and enjoy a nice meal and feel like they conquered something. And they're all worried about these snakes, but the reality is that there's an evil out there in the abyss, maybe on the road, that can't even be comprehended. And on the flip side of that, maybe there is this goodness, this life-sustaining fire that is equally difficult to glimpse and equally difficult to comprehend. And maybe we don't know much about carrying the fire, but we know that the boy is doing it, and we can feel that that is a worthwhile and noble goal that drives him forward. Now, to wrap up, I'm going to read the final paragraph of the book, which seems a little bit out of place, but I think it's worth noting here. So, quote, "Once there were brook trout in the streams in the mountains. You could see them standing in the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. They smelled of moss in your hand, polished and muscular and torsional. On their backs were vermiculate patterns that were maps of the world in its becoming, maps and mazes, of a thing which could not be put back, not be made right again. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery." End quote. So maybe those deep and eternal and mysterious things like good and evil are represented by the things that we see in the world. All things are a map of the world. All things are a story. And all things tell us how this world came to be. And maybe there is a mysterious oneness. Maybe it's goodness, maybe it's love, maybe it's hope that is mercurial and can't be explained. But it's part of all of us, and it should be cherished and remembered. And that fire should be carried, because once it's gone, it's gone. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe on Patreon for bonus episodes and other perks. You can also join the Patreon for free to get a monthly recommendations email and a sneak peek at what's up next. You can support in other ways, of course, by leaving a rating or review in your podcast app, by following on social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, etc., by sharing with a friend, or simply by continuing to listen. You can also sign up for the email newsletter that I've been working on. Links to all of this stuff are in the show notes. Any comments or suggestions you can send to reflectinghistory@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. As always, that's it for now.